I returned to New York with the feeling that life was about to take a new, adult direction. University was behind me, but much more serious challenges lay ahead. Work, housing, independent living. While I searched for my place, my father offered me to stay with him. His new family situation didn't come as a surprise. During my absence, he had married a woman named Sarah. We had seen each other a few times at family gatherings, and she always seemed friendly, even though she was younger than my father. My father's house was spacious and cozy, located in a quiet neighborhood in Brooklyn. Returning to this space felt like a symbol of respite before the real plunge into adult life. On the first morning after my return, I was preparing for a job interview. This was a position that could mark the beginning of my career. Something important awaited me, and I felt the rising tension. I locked myself in the bathroom, trying to gather my thoughts. The water from the shower hit the tiles, creating a veil of steam that momentarily distracted me from all my nerves. It felt like I was in my little world, where nothing could disturb me. Suddenly, there was a knock at the door. It was Sarah. "Nick, are you in there?" Her voice was soft but confident. "Yes, I'm here," I replied, wiping the foggy mirror. "Sorry to bother you, but I need to grab something from the bathroom. Can I come in?" I didn't think much of it. Everything felt completely ordinary. Sarah wasn't a stranger to me, and her request sounded perfectly harmless. "Of course, come in," I responded calmly, lost in my thoughts. She entered, wearing a light robe, her blonde hair neatly tied up in a bun. I thought she would just take something and leave without lingering. Sarah opened the cabinet and began looking for something on the shelves. I continued my routine, but noticed from the corner of my eye that her robe had slightly come undone. The moment was so unexpected that I froze. Sarah didn't notice that the fabric of her robe had slipped off her shoulder, revealing her skin. A feeling of awkwardness flickered inside me, and I quickly averted my gaze, feeling my cheeks start to flush. Everything about it felt wrong. "Is everything okay?" I tried to suppress the tension in my voice, hoping she hadn't noticed my reaction. She turned to me, her gaze still calm, but there was something else in it, a faint shadow of a smile that I couldn't explain. "Yes, everything's fine." Sarah showed me a bottle of aspirin. "You're probably nervous about the interview?" "A little," I replied, trying to maintain an air of normalcy. She left the bathroom, and I stood there feeling my internal world shift. For the first time since my return home, I sensed that things might not be as simple as they seemed. After that morning, something changed. It seemed like nothing serious had happened, just a simple misunderstanding in the bathroom, an ordinary day. Yet inside me, a strange inner fire ignited that I couldn't ignore. I tried to distract myself with interview preparations, but my thoughts kept circling back to that moment. It felt wrong, yet it lingered with me. The entire day passed in a fog. I walked the streets of New York, listening to the city's noise, but in my mind, Sarah's image played on repeat, her fleeting glance and how her robe had slightly slipped off her shoulder. I tried to wrestle with this feeling. After all, she was my father's wife, a woman I was supposed to respect and see only through the lens of their relationship. Yet something inside me rebelled against logic, creating a feeling I had never experienced before. When I returned home, it was late. My father, as always, was working late, and Sarah was cooking dinner. She greeted me in the kitchen with a warm smile, as if nothing had happened. The room smelled of something delicious and homey, but I could feel a barely perceptible tension hanging in the air. We sat down at the table. Sarah talked about mundane things, how her day had gone, plans for the weekend, that my father wanted to visit his friends. I nodded, trying to engage in the conversation, but my internal anxiety consumed me more and more. At one point, as she talked about a new book, I caught myself not listening to her words, but staring at her features, at her eyes. This was wrong. I needed to stop. "Nick, are you okay?" Her voice pulled me from my thoughts. I nodded, trying to suppress the unease. "Yeah, just a little tired." I lied, but it only intensified my inner conflict. After dinner, I decided to step outside for some fresh air. Sarah offered to keep me company, and I found no reason to refuse. We walked silently through the evening neighborhood, the sounds of cars around us. But it didn't alleviate the growing discomfort within me. "I think we need to talk," she suddenly said, stopping by a bench in the park. I froze. Those were the words I hadn't expected to hear. I sat down next to her, trying to keep my composure, but my heart was racing. "I wanted to discuss what happened this morning." Her voice was quiet, almost inaudible. I felt her hand brush against mine, and the gesture was so unexpected that I didn't know how to react. "I know it was an accident, but I feel like something has changed between us since that moment." Everything inside me was swirling. I wanted to say something reasonable, to explain that it was just my imagination. But when I turned to her, our eyes met. It was that moment when emotions took over. We both knew it was wrong, yet the world around us seemed to fade away. Sarah slowly leaned closer, and before I could say anything, her lips brushed against mine. The kiss was soft, almost imperceptible, yet at that moment, nothing in the world felt stronger. The next morning, I woke up with the feeling that the world around me had changed, though I wasn't sure how. The memory of the kiss with Sarah lingered, that fleeting moment that couldn't simply vanish from my life. But what came next? How would it affect both of us? How could I look my father in the eye now? My mind was overwhelmed with questions that had no answers. I decided to avoid her, to hide in my room, leave the house when she wasn't nearby, and try to forget. It wasn't easy, given that we lived under the same roof, but the thought of taking a step back felt like the right choice. As I was getting ready to go for a walk, there was a knock at the door. I tensed up internally, but opened it. Sarah stood in the doorway with a serious expression on her face. "We need to talk," she said quietly. I could no longer evade the conversation. We descended to the living room, which overlooked a small garden in the backyard. I silently sat on the couch, feeling a swell of uncertainty inside me. Sarah sat down next to me but kept her distance. There was a shadow of regret in her eyes, yet something else I couldn't grasp. "I know what happened was wrong," she began, struggling to find the right words. "I don't know what came over me. It was fleeting but significant. We both understand that." I remained silent, trying to collect my thoughts. Everything happening felt surreal. How had we, both adults, ended up in this situation? "Nick," she continued, her voice trembling yet firm, "we can't pretend it didn't happen, but we also can't let it ruin everything we have. I love your father, but what occurred between us, it's more than just a mistake." I felt the blood drain from my face. The words I didn't want to hear had been spoken. I hadn't admitted it to myself, but there was some truth in what she said. That kiss hadn't been an accident, but allowing it to happen again would lead to catastrophe. "We have to stop," I said, trying to infuse my words with the resolve I didn't truly possess. "We can't continue. It's wrong. He'll never forgive us." Sarah took a quiet breath and looked at me, her eyes shimmering with unshed tears. "I know, this is madness, and I'm not asking for anything from you, but I just can't pretend that I don't feel something for you. You mean a lot to me, and you understand me better than anyone else." I froze again. Her words pierced through me, revealing what I had been trying to hide deep inside. I wasn't ready to hear it, but like her, I couldn't completely deny that I had feelings for her. "We need to stay away from each other," I said, standing up and heading toward the door. "It's the only way to preserve something." She didn't stop me. I left the living room, feeling as if the walls of the house were closing in around me. Outside, it was an ordinary day, but everything seemed different for me. We both knew that our lives would never be the same again. For several days, I lived as if in a fog. Each morning began with the same thought. I tried to convince myself that I had done the right thing, that the distance between Sarah and me was the best way forward. But something inside me still wouldn't let go. Sarah's words, her gaze, the feelings I was trying to suppress, all of it haunted me, refusing to release its grip. I tried to avoid home, finding things to do, going out for walks in the streets of New York, where the city's cacophony should have drowned out my thoughts. But every time I returned, the silence of the house welcomed me with that same oppressive atmosphere. My father was busy at work. Sarah behaved as usual, but we both knew it was just a facade. One evening, I returned later than usual. The door to the porch was ajar, and I saw Sarah sitting in a wooden chair. Looking at her, I realized I could no longer run away. There was something in her eyes that drew me to her, That same unresolved force that had existed between us since that very first day. I quietly approached and sat down beside her. She didn't turn around, continuing to stare into the night. In her hands was a cup of tea from which steam rose into the evening air. "I thought you'd avoid me again," she finally said, not taking her gaze off the distant horizon. "I can't avoid this forever," I replied, feeling the tension building. "Really?" She turned to me, and I noticed that her eyes were filled not only with sadness but with something deeper. "Because I feel like we're both trying to pretend we can forget what happened." Her words hit home. I sighed, unsure of what to say. Sarah set down her cup and leaned slightly forward. "We both know this isn't just a mistake. What happened means something, Nick, and you feel it just as much as I do." I wanted to respond, but instead of words, a quiet, "I don't know what to do," came out. In that moment, she stood up and stepped closer to me. My heart began to race, and I felt all thoughts of right and wrong slip away. In her eyes was everything I felt but couldn't admit. "We shouldn't—" I started, but her lips were on mine before I could finish the sentence. It was a moment when the whole world stopped. The kiss was soft, yet it carried all the tension and passion that had built up inside us. I couldn't resist it, nor could she. My hands trembled, but I pulled her closer, as if we both found in that moment the truth we had been trying to deny. But it didn't last long. I pulled back, breaking the kiss and trying to catch my breath. "We shouldn't be doing this," I breathed out, feeling a wave of guilt wash over me. Sarah didn't respond immediately, but her eyes sparkled with tears. She lowered her head, trying to hide her emotions. "I know," she whispered, "but it's already happened, and now we need to decide what to do next." Those words sounded like a final toll. I realized that everything had changed completely, and there was no turning back. Several days passed since that evening on the porch, and I felt my internal struggle reach its peak. The entire situation with Sarah was consuming everything else in my life. I could no longer live in this chaos, where my feelings clashed with my morals, and each day brought increasing tension. I knew I had to make a decision, not only for myself, but for Sarah as well. Living in constant ambiguity was unbearable, and despite all the emotions, we needed to draw a line. I resolved to have an open and honest conversation with her today, regardless of my fears about the consequences. That evening was calm. My father was working late and the house was quiet. Sarah was in the kitchen, preparing dinner as if nothing had happened. I noticed how she was trying to maintain her composure, avoiding any conversation about what had transpired. But inside me, everything was churning. I could no longer hide the truth. "Sarah, we need to talk," I said, entering the kitchen and sitting across from her. She looked at me, clearly aware that a serious conversation was about to take place. Her face became tense, but she nodded, signaling me to continue. "We can't pretend everything is okay anymore. What happened between us has changed everything, and I can't ignore it." I began, trying to speak calmly, although everything inside me was trembling. Sarah took a quiet breath, lowering her gaze. "I know, Nick. I feel it too. But what can we do? We both understand that this is wrong." Her words echoed my own thoughts. I ran my hand through my hair, trying to focus. "We need to end this. I can't keep living with this burden. I know you mean a lot to me, but we can't betray my father. It would ruin everything." Sarah was silent for a long time, as if fighting with herself. Finally, she looked up and said, "You're right. We can't keep going like this. I don't want to hurt your father, and I also don't want to destroy your life. We have to stop now before it goes too far." I felt a bit of tension ease, but along with it came a sense of emptiness. I knew this was the right decision, but it didn't make it any easier. Our feelings were real, but allowing them to develop would lead to the destruction of our family. "I'm going to leave," I said after a short pause. "It's the only way for us both to move forward. I'll find an apartment and start my life on my own. It's the right thing for both of us." Sarah nodded silently, her eyes glistening with tears, but she didn't protest. She understood that this was the end, and that it might be the only way to save us both. The next day, I began packing my things. The atmosphere in the house was strange, filled with silent pain but also relief. My father, unaware of anything, welcomed my decision to become independent, and Sarah supported him, concealing everything that had been between us. As I left, Sarah and I exchanged one last look. In it was sadness, but also understanding. We both knew we had made the right choice. Although this chapter of our lives was closing, we understood that we should not walk down the path that would lead to even greater chaos. Walking away from the house, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. Life was just beginning, and despite all the complicated emotions, I knew one thing. It was the right decision. Now, I needed to start anew, leaving those feelings in the past.